Manchester United 0, Tottenham Hotspur 1. It is the afternoon of one of the most disappointing, lackluster European final performances I have ever seen. And I've been sitting here all day so far trying to figure out how to approach this video. Is this a video where we sit here and talk about tactics and I'd be a football nerd and break down what went wrong? Or is it a day where we just sort of sit and talk about whatever that game was in the current state of Manchester United? And I've settled for something sort of in between, where we're gonna, go over to the tactics board and talk about United and the way that we approach the game, but also just have a bit of a chat as well because, you know, it was just so flat from United. I felt like we could have played that game for a couple of days and we would have scored a goal because Vicario in goal for Spurs wasn't really tested, and it was so flat. And when I talk about being flat, I mean a lack of intensity. Now, I'm not saying that the players were lazy. I think that's an awful term to throw around. Players not wanting it, not working hard enough. I don't think that's the case. What I would say was a lack of urgency in the way that Manchester United played. We know that Spurs obviously got their goal with a huge slice of fortune in the goal, and after that they sat very deep. Postecoglou sort of sacrificed his typical ideas and principles, if you like, as a manager, to get his team deep behind the ball. We anticipated the fullbacks being high, but he didn't do that. He sort of threw in a bit of a curveball, to be honest. This isn't how Postecoglou normally approaches games. But basically, for so much of this match, it was on Manchester United to try and play through Spurs, to try and break them down. And for so long, there was just a lack of urgency in the way that we were trying to do that. And again, I think some of that comes down to the personnel that we use in different positions. And we're going to talk about the 3-4-3. And we've had this conversation so many times in the past 6 months, the idea of playing fullbacks at wing-back. Now, I get it, right? Manchester United are restricted at the moment with the squad. We don't have the deepest squad in the world, and certainly we don't have a lot of quality in depth. But the fullbacks at wing-back sort of summed up the problem for me in this game, because I wouldn't even say United were necessarily poor in the final third, although we were, but it felt almost impossible to get there in the first place. We were so slow, so lethargic on the ball. It was quite easy for Spurs just to sort of shuttle from side to side. Now, I will say the intensity, the tempo of the game was bad from both teams. This wasn't just a United problem. Spurs didn't play a good game of football. I also don't feel it was helped by the referee. Now, I'm not trying to lump in on the referee and look for someone to blame. But I think, Spurs had 22 fouls in this game and only got 2 yellow cards, and that feels on the low side to me. It was so stop-start. Both teams just sort of clipping ankles, going in with forearms for the headers, just to break up the game. Lots of fouls all over the pitch, and it just killed any potential momentum. I think the ref could have helped the game by booking people, because then people would have been more scared of fouling, and it might have created a better flow to the football match. Instead, as it was, we took 2 unbelievably stodgy teams and allowed them to play stop-start football with, like I said, a slightly questionable refereeing performance. But realistically, more of the blame rather than the ref is on Manchester United. I felt like this game was a nice summary of the problems that United have had all season. It starts off deep on goal kicks. We didn't even attempt to play out here, and that probably says where we are as a football club. Modern football is so much about trying to play out from the back, trying to play through the press, trying to create spaces and attack big spaces. We know that Amorim wants to do that. We've spoken about it quite a lot. Amorim wants us to play the ball deep. He wants us to draw the opposition onto us so that we then have space to go into. But in this game, the biggest game of the season, we didn't even really attempt to do that. And that sort of, almost to me, is like an underlying message from Amorim of how he truly rates this squad currently for what he wants to do. Because for in the biggest game of the season, for him to sort of largely, not always, but largely abandon his idea of playing out from the back, that seems odd. You can see in Onana's pass map, he was a goalkeeper that was regularly going long with the ball. And also, on the flip side of it, Spurs were doing the same. And that probably sums up the quality, of this game, or the lack of quality. It's one of the worst European finals I've ever seen. Both goalkeepers on goal kicks, booting it long. That doesn't feel like the modern, quick, fast-paced, flowing football that we're used to watching, week in, week out in the Premier League. Not necessarily from United, but the best teams in the Premier League. It's about playing quickly. It's about moving the ball fast, moving at pace. And this game felt so slow in comparison. And it just didn't work for United, because with the game being slow, it gave Spurs so much time to get into their shape. And then for United, it's about, can you break them down? Have we got those patterns? Have we got those combinations on the ball to unlock the Spurs defence? But also, are we giving our players freedom on the ball to to try things, to have a go, to take people on? For large parts, no. But also, do we have the right players in the positions to try and do that in the first place? And I would say no. I think when a team is playing deep, like Spurs were, I don't know that we need to see Mazraoui and Dorgu on the pitch for so long. And this is where I point at Ruben Amorim a little bit. I don't know that his subs were bad, but I just think they were all about 20 minutes too late. Dalot for Mazraoui isn't a bad sub, because Dalot does bring a greater intensity. He does bring more threat in the final third. But I feel like you do it on the 55th minute to just change the tempo of the game, rather than the last 5 minutes when you're desperate for a goal. At that point, bringing a wing back on doesn't seem to make much sense. It's the same with Dorgu on the left-hand side. Good player, and I think he had a pretty good game. One of United's more impressive players, I would say. But again, when we're chasing a goal for 45 minutes, does he need to stay on the pitch for so long? Is there not a way of getting your Garnachos onto the pitch earlier? Because we got so stuck out wide. And when we were going into these positions, it's sort of, you have a look, you have a go, but there's too many Spurs players back defending. Johnson and Richarlison did a really good job of helping out their fullbacks. So for Dorgu and Mazraoui, it's a lot of sort of turning around and going backwards. And I've spoken about it a lot, sort of that horseshoe of doom. And I think this pass map from United really sums up the way that we just passed round our back five. Mason Mount, we've sort of been preparing him for this game for the past 6 weeks, it seems. We barely even noticed him. And in part, that's a criticism of him not doing enough, not showing for the ball enough, not demanding the ball, not going and getting it. But also, it's a team problem, because if your left 10 isn't seeing a lot of the ball, then there's a ball progression issue from the rest of the team. The same with Rasmus Højlund. Could he have played better? Yes, he has to do more to make life difficult for the centre-backs. He has to test them more. But also, I didn't see Højlund given half a chance. I didn't see a good delivery into the box for him to attack. You can see the cross map here. United not really asking questions till late, and not really providing good deliveries into the box. Everything was pretty easy for Van de Ven and Romero to clear away. And I think that sort of sums up the problems. But the question I've got for you guys is, how much is poor individual performance an issue for the manager? How much blame should the manager take? Because I would say, we've just said Mount and Højlund were quiet. Ahmad, good first half, really quiet second half, didn't really do enough. Mazraoui struggled in possession. I think even Maguire wasn't great with his passing in this game. Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes, the two that we were sort of turning to in this game to be our experience, to lead us through the game. I thought Casemiro was rather quiet and Bruno Fernandes was outright poor. Now, of course, players have bad days. We expect that. But I think when you're seeing so many players having a bad day, there is a moment where you have to look at the manager. Now, I'm someone that still has belief in Ruben Amorim. I think he needs time. It's very difficult to change a football team without changing the football team, without changing the players, without giving him new tools to work with. So I completely understand that. Give Amorim time and all of that. Yeah, sure. But also there is a job as a manager where you've got to get the best out of your players. And in our biggest game of the season, he didn't manage to get the best out of Casemiro. He didn't manage to get the best out of Bruno Fernandes. He didn't get the best out of Ahmad. Garnacho was one of our brightest players and he only played 25 minutes. For me, there is a managerial issue there as much as the players. And that's why I feel that this game summed up our season very nicely. The players need to do better, and we probably physically need better players. We need new footballers on that pitch. But also the manager has to do more. Ruben Amorim in this game for me didn't do enough. We didn't force this game. We didn't attack the Spurs goal until the last 10 minutes when Spurs start bringing on extra centre-backs, extra defenders. That was the only time we really looked like, oh, hang on, we actually need a goal, by the way. Or like, oh, it would be nice to score. Even someone like Bruno. Love Bruno. Absolutely adore him. There's a poster up there for a reason. I love Bruno Fernandes. Amazing player. Didn't have a good night last night. But what I felt for me was his lack of urgency was a bit odd for Bruno Fernandes. He's a player who normally will go everywhere all over the pitch and just tell people to give him the ball because he knows that he can do something with it. And it didn't even feel like we had that. We didn't have the player, when it was tough, we didn't have the player who grabbed the game. Garnacho was the player who tried to do it to an extent on the left wing, although, he is a young player, his dribbling was inconsistent, and he didn't play that great when he came on. This is what I've been so confused before the video about what to talk about. Tactically, it felt like a lot of the same problems we've had all season. Pressing wasn't a massive feature of this game because neither team really tried to play out from the back too much. In the middle of the pitch, we look stuck. We look like we have an inability to play through the centre. There's not much desire to actually progress through the middle of the pitch. And that's why Mount was so quiet in this game, right? Because we're not trying to move the ball centrally. So if you're not going through here, through the middle of the pitch, then you've got to carry a threat out wide, right? And we didn't do that. I spoke before the game about how Spurs are vulnerable. Spurs are not good defensively. Again, they've conceded the 5th most goals in the Premier League this season. Spurs are not a good defensive side. And I spoke about there was gaps in the middle we could exploit, and there were also gaps out wide that we could exploit. And even with how the systems played out last night, those gaps were there. They were there. I can do another video on it if you like. The gaps were there for United to attack. We just didn't do it. Through the middle of the pitch, we didn't progress particularly well at all. And out wide, like I said, Dorgu and Mazraoui, they give it a go, right? They try. But they're not attacking players. They're not attacking players. When we're getting close to goal, we've got a front line of 2 fullbacks, a striker who's really struggling, Mason Mount who was very quiet, and Ahmad who's just coming back from fitness issues. And that's why I feel that we could have played this game for another 2 days, and I just don't think the ball would have ever gone into the net. And like I've said a few times, it just felt like a summary of this season of just flat. Like I don't feel as though United were horrendous last night. You know, this isn't one of those ones where I go, oh my God, absolutely pathetic. It was just a load of nothing. It was 90 minutes of nothing happening. You know, in big games, you're always waiting for that sort of click, that spark to get it going from both teams. It felt like we were waiting for that, and maybe it happened on the 85th minute when we needed some goals. That was the only time the game really felt like it started to come to life. And even then, we were just chucking crosses into the box that lacked the quality. And that's why I've done this sort of video. Because we can talk about tactics all day. But I think there's only so much, that tactics can do. Tactics are only important to a degree. And when you see a game that flat, I don't actually know that the tactics are massively important, which is why we haven't spoken about that today. I'm a bit like you guys, right? I sit here and try to be an analyst and tell you what's going good for United, what's going wrong, where we need to improve, where we've already improved, and all those things. But at the end of the day, I'm a Manchester United fan above everything else. And I have the same feeling that most United fans have, where we just kind of sit here, stunned. Honestly, not even that mad. Not a few hours after full time. Not even that mad. Not even that angry. Not even that upset. Just almost stunned. Because we lost the unlosable game. The game that you could not lose. We lost. With a whimper. So it's a bit of a weird one. It's almost that, what do we do now? What next? It feels now we just wait for recruitment. We wait for pre-season and go from there. And it's not the season or the end of the season that we were looking for. But it is quite fitting of the season we've had. So I think for today's video, that's all I really want to say. And another day, the next few days, we will do more tactical stuff and look at where United are struggling, what we need to change, what we need to address. But for today, I thought I'd just give you sort of my response actually as a United fan. And it is just flat disappointment. Move on to the next thing. Just end the season, please. So, yeah, that's all I've got for today. Bit of a weird video. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. Not that insightful, but again, just a United fan being real, to be honest. Yeah, I guess that's that. And I will see you guys in the next one.